Hello and welcome to episode 2 of our collaboration podcast series. This episode we're covering the moment good enough stops being good enough. And joining me today is Tom Boyle, head of telecoms for Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, and Jack Carr, who's head of our pre-sales team specializing in collaboration. Hello, guys.
Hello. Yeah, happy to be here.
So obviously following on from episode 1, this is the moment good enough stops being good enough around voice and collaboration in particular. Tom, I'm going to utilise your expertise on this and dive straight in if that's okay. Is that what forces or what events force you to act to make changes around collaboration and in particular voice telephony? Give us some examples from history if you can.
So I think for us it's anything external, any sort of external stimuli. In the main these days, that's sort of withdrawal of support and cessation of service. Or there's more modern things that we deal with now where it might even be a near miss or an incident that's been in the press to do with communication, and then we're having to sort of react from there. But most things these days are reactive. We are reactive to those sort of things.
No, absolutely. And I guess there have been some major events, and there are some that we'll be talking about, in particular the PSTN switch off, Jack, from your side of things.
Yeah, everybody's favourite thing. Well, it's the big copper elephant in the room, isn't it? We've known about it and known the date for some time. That date, however, hasn't always been constant. It's been pushed back a little bit there. But the conversations haven't ever really changed. It is probably the largest example of a mass event forcing change across telecoms today. And, I think credit to not only our customers, but UK organisations across the board, because there have been significant efforts to get off legacy infrastructure. It's not in the perfect place. I don't think any of our competitors in industry would say that they've got an entire customer base of everybody who's happy and not reliant on the PSTN in any shape or form, but we are getting there. We've seen mass migration so far across probably what I class as the low-hanging fruit. So these are, your knowledge-based workers, maybe your contact center agents. But what we're still seeing is a lot of the fringe use cases, a lot of that reliance upon the PSTN still. So these are things like elevator phones, alarm systems, entryways, in car park barriers, that kind of thing. That's still hanging on. And we can't take for granted that things will just keep working. We do still need to pay these things care and attention. So I think that's probably the biggest example today of where change is needed. But I mean, Tom, from your perspective, you've lived and breathed this, right?
Yeah, I think it's all of those nuance cases that you talk about that still keep us up at night. I think that it's quite straightforward in reality to move from ISDN to SIP or ISDN to some other cloud offering. It is those bizarre ones. I mean, we've got really bizarre ones that I've seen in Sheffield that share with Forest Row work as well. There's bits of kit that connect to the helipad that do weather signalling that we never knew relied on ISDN. So it's really strange things like that, in all honesty. But in the grand scheme of things, I think in healthcare it still worries me, because I think that people don't realise, obviously, the absence of a national comms plan. I don't think that organisations realise sort of the operational impact there's going to be. Certainly patients aren't aware, and in the main way to get hold of a patient or to get hold of an NHS provider is a telephone, and it's a landline. So there's risk either way, and I think probably a bit more attention needs to be paid for the NHS, at least from the operational perspective.
Yeah, no, it's always concerned, isn't it? Exactly. How do we keep lives on, but keep operating as well? And I think voice is highly underplayed in that particular area, isn't it? And yeah, I know you've been doing some fantastic work around that industry wide as well, and emphasising that, which is great. As well as the PSTN switch off, which is the big compelling event in the telecoms industry from the voice side of things. Tom, you covered a couple of areas around forces or events that force you to act. From our perspective, being a customer of ours, you're in our consideration, you're ahead of the game. But how did you get to that point, and how did you decide that the trigger point was a point that you had to make changes, and what were the pressures that you had to have to do that? Was it something you wanted to get ahead of the curve on?
I think COVID was the biggest one for us, is that we were all of a sudden making way more phone calls, taking way more phone calls.
Yeah.
Because we were on a tariff that meant that we were being charged per call, and we're making thousands and thousands more. We were spending a fortune, and it wasn't sustainable whatsoever. We had considered for a long time the fact that we needed to move to SIP, But that was the trigger, really, is that it just wasn't sustainable. And we knew that there was going to come a point where there wasn't going to be, I don't want to get too polemic, but there wasn't always going to be all of this funding that was going to last forever, that was based around COVID. There wasn't going to be this money that just continued all the time. So obviously we knew we needed to do something about it. I think that's when we probably first have conversations with you guys about what it would look like, how it would work, and then the cost. I think that's a big one as well. I don't think people realise, especially large organisations, the cost saving that they could make. So it was nice for once to actually, even though we were spending a lot at the time, doing a project that was a new technology and it was going to cost less. That's quite rare. And I think that was the driver for us.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Of course, I'd chosen to forget about COVID, and actually, as a wicked minute, particularly in the health space, of course, it was a massive driver for that, for change, but also moving to the cloud, as you said, but then some of the associated thoughts or pressures that come with that as well. The question about adaptation and changing. From your perspective, talking to customers, why do changes to telecoms or to telephony estates or collaboration platforms feel risky or urgent when a trigger hits?
Well, I think it comes back to what the trigger is, how far out you are. And I think it sounds a bit odd when we talk about cold hard technology, but it's the people behind it. So I think human nature is that if change is driven from a we need to do this because a negative event is happening, PSTN switch off, end of support equipment, repeated outages, that kind of thing, versus we want to do this because we see a positive outcome from it. I think human nature will lead to a different adoption journey there. If you push away from negative, I think it creates a lot of pressure onto users, whereby we need to do this, otherwise bad things are going to happen. It increases the stakes, and it means that there's often a lot of nervousness around projects. We see that. That's not to say that there isn't that level of nerves or hesitation when it comes to migrating for positive reasons. What we need to remember, especially internally in Gamma, is that, migrations of UC estates or wider phone platforms, they're very regular for us. It's day to day. But for our end organizations and our end customers, these are changes that they might make once 5-7 years, possibly something
longer
like that,
feels for us in
possibly
healthcare.
longer if we go to healthcare. These are infrequent changes where people have deep-seated familiarity in what they're doing today, how it works, how to manage it, and what it can and can't do. When you make that kind of move, it does create a lot of unknown, which I think is why being quite tightly knit with your partner is very important to kind of ease those nerves, make it feel less risky, and make it feel a bit more repeatable from the familiarity of working with the right partner behind the scenes.
No, I think that's really interesting. And the partnership side of things, it is about, and we were talking about this earlier, Tom, off the podcast, but it's about understanding what's happening in the marketplace and how, where if good isn't good enough, how do you understand what's happening? How do you understand the impact that innovation is going to have on you? Just going back to the adaptability, from your experience, that organisations find hard to adapt. I mean, I guess you can use your
I think
Sheffield Teaching Hospitals experience, but just in general conversations you have with peers.
I don't think there's any areas that aren't difficult to adapt, and I think because a phone call is live or a session on any collaboration platform, because it's live and instantaneous, any problem with that call or any issue with that call that you're on, any packet loss, it's degraded. The call's poor, the feedback's instant. So there's a worry about even the most basic things. Whereas if you're changing any other platform, anything else that's, for us, I suppose, an EPR, is that you sat on a platform, you press a button, there might be a second or two delay, but you were accepting that that's the case because you would press next or back or okay. Whereas on a telephone call, that doesn't happen. As soon it's real time, and I think that means that even, the lowest common denominator for a wall phone or a ward phone it's a risk. And I think peers are saying exactly the same things, is that telephony's just worked for so long and so well. We were saying earlier, Jack, ISDN was bomb-proof until it's not. I suppose there was an absence for us for a strategy for UC or for CX until we need one.
Yeah.
And that's the risk and the difficulty, right?
Yeah, no, of course. And as you say, voice calls real time and absolutely noticeable if something goes wrong with it or a number can't be contacted. And And I guess that's the other thing as well, isn't it? Is that there are patients or citizens in your environment that have had a telephone number in maybe their mobile for years, and they just want to dial that number nice and easy from their phone book, and it goes through, regardless of the technology that sits behind it. They don't really care.
I think that's a real one that someone somewhere needs to hone in on a lot more. And I don't know if it's the NHS or it's the Centre for the NHS, is that there lies a responsibility somewhere for that patient population, aside from their provider at the moment, to let them know that this is happening. Because there's going to be scenarios where either your healthcare provider is without service, or as an individual you're without service. And how are you gonna engage with that supplier, engage with that patient? And the problem is we're going to find out about that after incidents instead of thinking about it before. And there's some responsibility in the industry somewhere. Where that sits, I don't know. But yeah, that's a real worry.
That's absolutely right. Good enough is, it works. But better is
who's it working for?
Who's it working
benefiting?
for?
Yeah,
who's it benefiting? But also, how do we ensure it continues working in the future? Because you can't predict future. If you have the resilience options, or you consider how you're going to ensure that resiliency, then you've got a really strong position to be in. And that means that you don't have to deal with those, some of those negative connotations of the service not working. So, Jack, just moving or pivoting slightly to force change and the foundations of unified comms and voice platforms in particular. When change is unavoidable, what weaknesses do we typically see surface across UC collaboration and voice in particular?
Ever since COVID, we've seen major players really get into their pomp in the UC and collaboration space. We've got major players in the market across several different strategic technology vendors. So you do have a choice in the market, but they'll all have some areas in which they're a little bit stronger than others. But I think the common denominator across all of them is going back to those fringe use cases, the things that actually ISTN made look really simple, but you do need other considerations. So, a UC platform is great, and everybody likes to talk about how, a resilient and scalable cloud is and all that, but we were speaking about this earlier, and sometimes it's not always a one-size-fits-all, particularly in healthcare. We took for granted a bit of the ISTN element of power, whereas when we move to a VoIP world, having resilient power sources and connectivity sources to your site, that's another consideration. And sometimes if your site is cut off from the wider world, well, what are you doing for local survivability in that case? Because, an NHS trust is probably as good an example of this as any in any industry. Calling within a site is arguably as important in some cases as calling externally as well. And how does your platform address that? How does it cater for not best case, but worst case scenario? So I think making sure that you're mapping out what could be worst case is incredibly important at the first stage of engagement. Don't just plan for everything working absolutely fine, because if it was at that point, it'd be really easy to make these changes and choose a technology partner to work alongside. But we need to cater for what could happen in that chase.
No, absolutely. And just following on from that, and then I'm going to ask you, Jack, first around, and then Tom, really appreciate your comments as well. How do those legacy dependencies and fragmented ownership of those technologies that you've just talked about sort of show up at this stage in particular?
But I think when you get to the point where you're considering a move, it's only then becomes really apparent how many stakeholders you have, not only internally, but externally as well. Who actually do you contract with for all the different components that make up a wider estate? And how does that all knit together? If you were to make a change, can you make some changes which are redundant of some elements? Are they all intrinsically linked? Do your contract end dates all line up? Do you have to prepare for some months of spare billing if you're to make a change too early? Do you have to prepare to see, can we roll some elements of it if we aren't ready to move yet? And how that kind of all lines up. And then, you ask the question of, well, if we move the platform, how do we manage our partnerships moving forwards as well?
Just picking up on that, I think that's really important, isn't it, around the partnership piece. Tom, I think you'll be best placed to answer this one if that's all right, which is around, you need to know where you want to go, don't you, in terms of, if you want to make good better, then I guess you need to be led by an outcome approach. Where do we want to be, and work backwards, or have I got that wrong?
No, I think that's fair. And I think for us in healthcare particularly, in all honesty, for this sort of thing, it is driven by cost.
Yeah.
And the fact that we can be in a position where we're going to save money, potentially have greater resilience, and then offer a better service with more functionality in the future, I think that's the driver.
Yeah. Reducing the cost, but actually just, and I've mentioned this on episode 1, and again, my favourite phrase, but simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, driving out cost by simplifying everything and, hopefully modernising it, making the cost of upgrades less is actually a really positive outcome to achieve.
I'd love to say it was by strategizing and having a 5-10 year plan, but realistically for us it's not practical.
Yeah.
But the fact that things just tend to be driven by cost or by funding, and it, as much as it is a perfect storm, we spoke about all the negative things that can go on, it is a really great opportunity for people to develop their voice estates, develop their collaboration estates, and get a lot more from it and spend a lot less.
Yeah.
And I mean, if we could think about, certainly for us, what we've saved at STH, Review Guys, or what other organisations are doing exactly the same across the whole NHS, especially with it being publicly funded, the savings versus what we're going to get from it, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I'm going to keep on with you, Tom, if that's all right, but we wish we'd looked at earlier a topic that I wanted to cover just at the end here is, are there any lessons from your perspective that you kind of think in hindsight, well, we got there, you are ahead of the game, but anything that you wish you'd looked at earlier?
I think the one that stands out for me, and I think that a lot of people don't know about it, and you might remember it, Sam, is that we didn't realise, I don't think many people in the industry do, is that when you port your telephone numbers from supplier A to supplier B,
Or supplier G.
All right, yeah. I was trying to be clever there and not say something that sounded like a supplier. It doesn't matter if you were with supplier A for 20 years, you may still have a reliance on supplier X, who originally was the range holder of those numbers. The scenario for us was that we thought we had complete reliance on the Gamma network, but actually we've got a reliance on 2 other provider networks to get our calls to you. And I think those are the things that people don't realise, is that whilst you think you have sole responsibility with your new supplier, is that there are occasions where there's very little that supplier can do and you can do. There's a reliance on 2 or 3 other parties that actually even Gamma might not necessarily have control over. And it is something that we've sort of, as the NHS, taken to Ofcom and asked if there was something we could do about it. Because you do naively assume that you move supplier and you think that you're solved and you don't have to worry, and you just speak to Gamma for a problem or another. And that's the biggest one that sticks out for me, is that was a lesson learned that and that I'd share widely, is that you need to understand how the porting process works, where reliance is placed.
But it just shows you how important the telephone numbers are.
Yeah.
Doesn't it, in terms of the voice estate, the collaboration estate, it's people still, actively use telephone numbers, and therefore it's really important for that to get right.
The concept of range holder, to me, just was, I just assumed it moved as a thing. In some cases, I've had the understanding that I think it can, and I think that there's other organisations that I've got friends that have explored something similar, where you can physically lift and shift, that sort of thing. But yeah, completely unaware that was the case, and it's quite a large risk for healthcare, especially.
Absolutely, it just drives the importance of it. Great, I think we've covered everything, guys, and thank you very much for your time on episode 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you.